skeptical about the current situation, but I would say that the necessity of the third-party role within any implementation of an agreement is crucial, whether it is on Jerusalem. I mean, we need a third-party forces in order to maintain and actually implement any agreement on Jerusalem, which eventually will be a shared city with maybe split sovereignty, but with a third party, if we would like to keep it as much as possible an open city, or at least the Holy Basin or the Walled City as an open city. I'm sure that we'll need also forces in order to safeguard Israel as a kind of a tripwire forces along the Jordan Valley, as well as monitoring, etc., forces as we see with the MFO in Sinai. And the MFO in Sinai post-79 agreement is a good example of third party which is doing its job under the radar. Now, regarding the open question that Ephraim raised, as some know, I graduated University of London. I did my PhD about this period on Jordan, on the period between 46 and 51. So I will answer as an historian, not as an Israeli Ephraim, as an Israeli historian maybe, but as objective as possible. The reason that 48 didn't lead to a Palestinian state is quite obvious. The Arab regimes didn't want a Palestinian state. I mean, neither Jordan, definitely not Abdullah, King Abdullah I, wanted a Palestinian state. Actually, together with Israel, I mean, before the war, the thoughts were not in order or in favor of a Palestinian state post 48 declaration of state by Israel, as well as the Egyptians. I mean, they wanted also their share of Palestine, and King Farouk didn't think about or hadn't thought about a Palestinian state. This was not the cards of the Arab conservative regimes at that time. Similarly, the Palestinian, and I won't enter into a historical lecture, believe me, but the Palestinian also thought at that time that Palestine, the entire Palestine, should be their state, and Israel doesn't have the legitimacy of neither declaring itself as a Jewish state as well as being there at all. But, and here comes the huge but, in 1988, 40 years later, the Palestinians made a strategical change, a Ben-Gurionistic change, if you want, of accepting partition, something that also in Israel before 47, we did not accept it. And the Palestinians accepted partition, and the partition is 22 on, I mean, Palestinian state on 22% and 78% for the Israelis. And since then, my question, my open question to ourselves, Ephraim, is why all Israeli regimes actually were against the Palestinian state. And if you ask me, and by this I'll end, if you ask me what is the real reason that we haven't reached a peace with the Palestinian and two-state solution, is actually no Israeli government really fostered the idea of two-state solution.
I'm going to bring in the audience in a moment, but I think these are two very important questions, and both our panelists want to respond, but if you can keep it brief, gentlemen.
Well, I'm not a historian, so I don't want to question Ron's historical analysis. I just say I disagree with it, and I'll write an article about it. I definitely do not accept what he said about the absence of any desire about Israeli governments to have a two-state solution. I think this is incorrect. And I was present at the time, from my vantage point, to my surprise actually, to some extent at that moment, when the Palestinians made their decision in 1988, 40 years too late, unfortunately, and they decided to change their policy. By the way, not just because they had a change of heart, but because situations on the ground were changing, and they realized that if they didn't change their policy, they wouldn't not only be in a position of not having the whole of Palestine, they would have been in danger of having nothing of Palestine, because things were developing on the ground. When they made that decision, within 4 years, you had the Oslo agreements, which you, Ron, were a party. But after the Oslo agreements, there were other negotiations as well. And let us not forget that it was an Israeli government which brought back Yasser Arafat to Gaza and handed over to him the Palestinian Authority which was set up. and actually installed him as the leader of those areas of Palestine in which the Palestinian Authority was going to exercise its rule. Admittedly, not full rule, not sovereign rule, but the act of bringing back an arch enemy who had fought Israel tooth and nail and who denied our right to exist, we brought him back. We enabled the Palestinians to set up their organization and their authority. And from that point on, to say that we were opposed to a two-state solution, I think this is not an historical comment. Maybe it's a policy comment of yours, Ron, but not a historical comment.
If I must say, the real two states.
Real,
states, you know,
real, yes. We brought him back,
60% state, we were in
We
favor.
brought him back, Ron. No other state in the world has brought back an enemy under such circumstances.
But to be a leader of an autonomy, not of a state.
We brought him back. We brought him back. Don't forget it.
Okay, well, let me intervene there and move on to the next, speaker. Unity government and international forces.
Yeah. I'm defining myself as an optimistic realist. So when it concerns my optimistic, that means that I have a vision. There is a place where I want to get. But when it concerns the implementation of this vision, I have to take into account the situation on the ground, reality. And that pertains very strongly to the question of Palestinian reconciliation. Because a few years ago, I used to think that Palestinian reconciliation should be a prerequisite for concluding a permanent status agreement. Because certainly when you check it theoretically, it makes much sense. If you have a broader consensus among the Palestinians, then maybe it will be more difficult to conclude the agreement. Maybe the negotiations will be tougher, but the implementation will be easier. But that was a few years ago, when the option of reconciliation seems feasible one, possible one. I am afraid that now the situation is different, and I am not impressed by the last contacts between Fatah and Hamas in Damascus, because I think it's political maneuvering. I think that the Abu Mazen government or the Fatah people want to send a message to Israel. They're saying that we should reach an agreement. Otherwise, we will have no alternative but to go with Hamas.